Whether upgrading or buying your first MIDI keyboard, most producers waste precious money on flashy features they'll never use. There are a ton of keyboards to choose from, and the spec sheets look like gibberish if you don't know what you're looking for. So by the end of this video, you'll be able to know exactly what to look for, the type of keys, MIDI implementation, Aftertouch, as well as what not to waste your money on. To start, let's talk about the keys themselves because I get a lot of questions on this. You're most likely going to run into three types of keybeds when looking at keyboards: synth action, semi-weighted action, and fully weighted keys. Synth action is going to be the lightest and bounciest of the three, which is ideal for compact and lightweight setups where you don't necessarily need the resistance of a semi-weighted or fully weighted keyboard. Semi-weighted keys are sort of in the middle where there is a little bit of resistance, but it doesn't at all feel like a real piano. You're typically going to run into semi-weighted keys on lower budget MIDI controllers, not only because it's a simpler mechanism than fully weighted, but it also helps the keyboard to be light and easy to travel with while giving you slightly more resistance than synth action. Fully weighted keys are going to give you the most resistance, much like a real piano. So if you're playing piano parts or you grew up on piano, this is certainly going to feel the best for that sort of stuff. But this is where it can get a bit tricky. How many keys should you get? Let's break it down. You're mostly going to run into 5 categories here, all with different purposes, so pay attention. 25 keys are going to be found on something like this little Launch Key Mini, which has miniature keys, but they also make 25s with full-size keys. So if you're really tight on desk space and want to play in some simple melodies, these are great for that, are pretty cheap, and can fit into a backpack. You'll also find similar keyboards with 37 keys, which is just another octave to play with. 49 keys is where you start to feel like you can really play some piano or synth parts with both hands. And I would say this is where many producers gravitate because these still don't take up a ton of space, but you can still do a lot with them. 61 is a step above that if you find yourself messing with the octave buttons a lot and feeling like you're stuck in one place. This is my favorite size for a travel setup because I can normally play all the parts I need to without jumping back and forth with the octave buttons, but you're going to have a hard time finding anything with fully weighted keys looking at 61 and below. That's where my number one favorite comes in, 73 keys, which I would say is for musicians who want a great piano-like experience, but don't need 88 keys taking up space in their studio. You'll have a much easier time finding these with fully weighted keys and sometimes at a really good price, like the Studio Logic SL73, which is a great controller for the price. And of course, 88 keys is what you'll find on a real piano, so many people prefer 88 just to have the full range of keys right in front of you at all times. I'd say if you're doing anything with classical music or you just think you'll make use of all 88 keys, this is great, but it will likely be a more expensive option. I find myself gravitating towards 73 because I've never felt like I needed another octave while playing many genres of music over the years, so I can save a bit of money and space this way, but let me know down in the comments what number of keys you gravitate toward. And while we're talking about the keys themselves, let's talk about how Aftertouch is such a polarizing aspect of these keyboards. If you don't know what Aftertouch is, it's basically when you press a key down to play a note, and then you press down past the trigger point to engage some sort of MIDI value that affects the sound in some way, like doo. There you go. Monophonic Aftertouch is the most common right now, and it sends one pressure value for the entire keyboard no matter what key you press. Polyphonic Aftertouch is still making its way into the market, but it's growing, and that's where you have separate pressure values for each individual note. I think at times this can be a bit of a gimmick, but I've also used it in some really cool and useful ways over the years, so it just depends on if you think you to make use of it. But let's talk about connectivity because this is one of the most overlooked elements of a keyboard. Many people are going to be happy with some sort of MIDI USB port on their keyboard, but you've also got to think about things like expression pedal inputs, how many of those you want, DIN MIDI ports, do you just need an output or an in, out, and through? If you know that all you're doing is connecting a keyboard to your computer, all you really need for that technically is a USB port. However, if you have any interest in triggering other physical instruments or synths, you're going to need at the very least a DIN MIDI output. It's also worth noting that if you have MIDI ports on your audio interface, also having them on your keyboard will will make it so that you don't have to take up another USB port on your computer. And regarding sustain or expression pedals, you'll probably want a sustain input, which you'll find on most keyboards anyways, but expression pedal inputs are great for articulating things like strings, where you can ramp dynamics up and down without having to go in afterward and do it in your DAW. Some keyboards nowadays even have Bluetooth MIDI connectivity, which can be really cool, but don't get your hopes up because there are some uses that are practical and others that are sketchy. I have successfully recorded MIDI tracks using Bluetooth MIDI, but I've also had experience where it was not reliable and lagged like crazy. I think it can be really good for things that aren't as time dependent. So if you're using transport controls wirelessly, that can be a really cool thing. And if there's a slight delay, it's probably not a big deal. But if you're buying a MIDI controller for the sole purpose of recording wirelessly, just know that it's not extremely reliable, but can be a fun feature at times. By the way, if you're getting any value out of this video, consider hitting that like button and subscribing if you haven't already. Also, if you ever end up wanting to buy any music gear and want to support this channel, I do have some affiliate links down in the description of this video, as well as all of my other videos. And if you happen to purchase anything through those links, it does help support this channel at no extra cost to you. So big thank you for using those links to buy new gear. But here's another place people waste money. Additional features like faders, knobs, chord and ARP modes. What I've learned over the many years of using these keyboards is that when I'm buying a keyboard, it seems like the winner of a certain price range would be the one with the most features, but that's not necessarily true. For example, there are keyboards with no drum pads, 8 drum pads, and even 16 on some of them. And I'll be honest with you, I've never found drum pads that I actually like using more than the keys themselves, but maybe I'm in the minority here. Then you have faders and knobs, which can be used to control parameters in your DAW, but the setup can sometimes be a bit of a pain, and because the faders are not typically motorized, I just don't find myself using them for adjusting levels much. But I will admit that the exception here is when MIDI controllers have deep software integration with their plugins, and I'll touch on that in a minute. Everyone has different needs, and fortunately, there are lots of keyboard options that prioritize certain features over others. For example, you can get an Arturia Keylab 61 for $600, which has a ton of great features on board, but a lightweight key bed. So if you're never going to use that stuff and you just want a good feeling keyboard, you're probably better off to get something like the Studio Logic SL73 or 88 and get fully weighted keys, a simpler layout, and you still get Aftertouch and transport controls. My point is that you may use these extra features, but many people won't, so just be real with yourself when it comes to the hardware features you'll actually use. I mentioned before that it's not always practical to use the faders and knobs on some of these controllers, but I will say that companies like Arturia and Native Instruments have done a really good job of integrating their MIDI controllers with their software. One really cool example of this is the Native Instruments I reviewed a while back. It integrates with the complete control software in a way that not only gives you a very immersive experience when controlling plugins, but also forms a deeper connection with your DAW than standard MIDI protocols. But I should mention here that with great power comes great desire to purchase more of their plugins. Fortunately, a lot of these controllers come with great plugin bundles. So the last thing I'll say on that is that if you're on the fence about a couple of different keyboards because they're priced similarly and have similar features, go check out their plugin bundles and just see which one resonates with you. A lot of these bundles actually overlap a bit, so just be on the lookout for that. Another thing I'll say on this whole topic, which I sort of touched on earlier, is to really make sure you have your priorities in mind when looking into these keyboards. What you don't want to do is go in blind and be distracted by all the shiny features if you're realistically never going to use them. But even with all of this in mind, it can still be a bit hard to know exactly which keyboard to go with, so I actually put together a playlist of videos reviewing and comparing different keyboards, so click here for that, and as always, thanks for hanging out.